February 1935. A desolate, wind-swept field near Daventry, Northamptonshire, England. A biting wind whips across the open ground, carrying the scent of damp earth and diesel. The atmosphere is less scientific endeavor, more desperate, last-ditch experiment. Sir Robert Watson Watt, a tall, intense physicist in a tweed suit, stands rigid with anticipation, his eyes fixed on a bank of primitive, intimidating electronic gear. Beside him is his assistant, Arnold "Skip" Wilkins. They are here not just to test an invention, but to answer a chilling existential question posed by the British Air Ministry. Can we detect an enemy bomber fleet at night, long before they reach the coast? The Air Ministry had already poured money into unproven, fantastical ideas. Even the so-called death ray that was supposed to vaporize enemy planes. Watson, Watt, and Wilkins knew the truth. A ray capable of killing a man could barely warm a teacup, let alone vaporize a warplane. Their proposal was grounded in a far more subtle yet powerful area of physics, radio echo. A Hayford heavy bomber, a slow, lumbering target, is flying a predetermined course 6 miles away. The silence is broken only by the crackle of the radio and the ticking of a clock. Then, a sudden, miraculous spike appears on the cathode ray oscilloscope screen, a jump in the signal. The needle wavers, confirming the existence of a reflected radio wave. Wilkins, a quiet man, simply states, "It's there. We've done it." Watson Watt, known for his stoicism, allows a thin, relieved smile to cross his lips. They've detected the bomber, not with a ray gun, but with physics. It wasn't a death ray, it was a detection ray. However, the road from a single aircraft detection at 6 miles to a continental defense system was immense. The scientific community, and more importantly, the hard-nosed military men, were deeply skeptical. To them, this strange collection of aerials and electronic boxes was an expensive, unproven distraction. It was one thing to see a blip on a screen, it was another to bet the fate of the nation on it. But in the shadow of Hitler's rearming Germany, there was no choice but to push forward, in secret, against a current of doubt and sometimes outright mockery. They called their new system Chain Home. The fate of Britain now rested on turning this single blip into a comprehensive shield. Over the next 3 years, Watson Watt, working under crushing secrecy and pressure, raced to build this shield. The first major installation went up at Bodfie Manor on the Suffolk coast in 1937. It looked alien, massive, intimidating arrays of transmission towers reaching 360 feet into the sky, paired with slightly shorter receiving aerials. Construction was slow and immensely expensive. The engineers had to contend with everything from finding the right frequency that wouldn't interfere with civilian broadcasting to battling bureaucratic skepticism. The Air Ministry, while funding the project, continued to view it with reserve. Key figures felt the money could be better spent on traditional defenses like fighter planes. One influential newspaper, upon catching wind of the secret tests, published an article sarcastically referencing the supposed death ray, cementing the image of radar as a fantastical, almost silly experiment. They just couldn't comprehend that simple radio echoes could hold the key to national survival. To quiet the skeptics and prove the system's operational value, the first full-scale military exercises were scheduled. The idea was simple. Use the Chain Home station at Bodsey to track dummy attacks launched by RAF bombers. The exercise was a near disaster. Initial readings were erratic, the operators were poorly trained, and the commanders on the ground, accustomed to visual spotting, refused to trust the intangible information coming from the screens. They were used to seeing the enemy. Radar offered only an abstract symbol. The initial results were so underwhelming that funding cuts were immediately threatened. Watson Watt understood the problem wasn't the technology, but the human element. He realized that a blip on a screen was useless without a lightning-fast system to interpret it and convert it into orders for pilots. It required a complete revolution in command and control. He and his team immediately began designing the Dowding system, a revolutionary layered defense structure named after Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, the Commander-in-Chief of RAF Fighter Command. Dowding, a man often described as cold and unyielding, was the only high-ranking officer who fully grasped radar's true potential, seeing it not as a standalone weapon, but as the central nervous system of Britain's air defense. The skepticism was slowly giving way to grudging acceptance, but the clock was ticking, and the German war machine was preparing to roll over Europe. By the summer of 1939, as the invasion of Poland drew nearer, Britain possessed a chain of 20 chain home stations ringing the vulnerable east and south coasts, from Wartling to St. Polum. The radar was now in place, but the most vital piece of the puzzle was the control system. Dowding knew the RAF would be massively outnumbered by the German Luftwaffe. To win, his fighters couldn't chase shadows. They had to be in the right place at the right time with maximum efficiency. The solution was a masterpiece of analog data processing. The raw, confusing data from the chain home stations, the height, speed, and direction of incoming raids, was fed instantly by dedicated telephone lines to a central filter room. Here, skilled Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF, personnel translated the blips into coherent plots. This refined information then flowed to the operations room at RAF Fighter Command Headquarters at Bentley Priory. Imagine the operations room, a sunken floor dominated by a huge map table of southern England, covered in color-coded counters representing every friendly and hostile aircraft in the sky. WAAF plotters, using long wooden rakes, constantly moved these counters. Above the floor, seated in the balcony, was the commander, the invisible hand who could see the entire battle unfold in real time. This system, powered by radar, allowed a mere handful of RAF Hurricane and Spitfire squadrons to be scrambled not blindly, but with surgical precision, climbing only when and where they were needed to meet the enemy. This efficiency was the true game changer. Without radar, the Luftwaffe could simply flown a decoy raid to exhaust the RAF's limited fuel and pilots, then launch the real attack moments later. But with chain home, every German feint, every shift in altitude was tracked. The RAF now had the priceless gift of 10 to 20 minutes warning. By the time the full fury of the Luftwaffe began in the summer of 1940, in what would be called the Battle of Britain, the skeptics were silenced. They had scoffed at the death ray, but the ability to see the invisible was proving to be the most potent weapon of all. The game was no longer about who had the most planes, it was about who had the best information. The real test, however, was only just beginning as the sky filled with the metallic roar of the enemy. August 13, 1940. Adlertag, the Day of the Eagle. This was the day the Luftwaffe officially began its campaign to destroy RAF Fighter Command and clear the skies for a German invasion. Massive formations of Dornier Doe 17 and Junkers Ju 88 bombers, escorted by hundreds of Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, streamed across the English Channel. Their primary targets were the RAF airfields and, critically, the chain home radar stations. They knew these towers were the eyes of the defense, but they utterly failed to grasp how the eyes worked. The German command, under Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, was hampered by a fundamental flaw. They thought radar was only used for coastal warning, not for tactical control. Their pilots, when attacking a radar station, assumed that destroying the main masts meant destroying the entire system. They were wrong. The receiving equipment, often housed in blast-proof bunkers below ground, remained operational even when the towers were reduced to twisted steel. More importantly, every time a German formation took off from France, the invisible beam of the chain home stations instantly located them. The operators at Bodsey, Ventnor, and Dover, often young men and WAAFs barely out of their teens, worked through the terrifying roar of the nearby attacks. They continued to pass the speed, bearing, and altitude of the incoming enemy through the doubting system. At RAF Biggin Hill, Squadron Leader Peter Townsend received the precise coordinates, the scramble order. His squadron of Hurricanes was airborne and climbing to meet the enemy not 5 minutes after the Germans were sighted over the French coast. The ability to intercept the enemy while they were still massing, rather than waiting for them to appear over London, was saving the RAF precious fuel, aircraft, and, most crucially, pilot lives. The German pilots, convinced they had destroyed the British capability, were repeatedly shocked to find perfectly positioned RAF fighters waiting for them, seemingly emerging from nowhere. They were convinced the British were using a sophisticated spy network, unable to believe that those spindly, mocked towers were orchestrating such an effective defense. For the British, the technology that was once dismissed as a fantasy was now a silent, deadly reality, the great equalizer in the greatest air battle in history. September 1940. The battle had reached its devastating climax. The Luftwaffe had shifted its focus, now hammering the airfields and central sector stations of fighter command. The chain-home network, while damaged, remained functional. One critical station, Ventnor on the Isle of Wight, was temporarily knocked out, forcing controllers to quickly reroute data through a neighboring station, a testament to the resilience built into the doubting system. The entire battle became a war of nerves, a deadly, high-speed electronic chess match being played hundreds of miles away from the true violence. The German High Command began to question why their overwhelming numbers weren't producing the expected attrition rate in the RAF. They simply couldn't put their finger on the British advantage. They continued to target what they could see, the airfields, but the unseen hand of radar continued to guide the fewer RAF fighters. Had the British been forced to patrol constantly, they would have been exhausted in days. Radar ensured that a pilot on the ground was a pilot resting, and a pilot in the air was a pilot engaging the enemy. Then, in a catastrophic intelligence failure for Goering, the Luftwaffe shifted targets entirely. Frustrated by the stubborn persistence of the RAF, Hitler ordered the bombing campaign to focus on London. This was a tactical error of immense proportions. By targeting the city, Goering eased the pressure on the RAF airfields, and by extension on the chain-home system itself. It gave the severely strained fighter command the breathing room they desperately needed to repair the airfields, replace aircraft, and rest their weary pilots. When the massive daylight raids returned over London, the doubting system was ready. The WAAF plotters, the filter room officers, and the commanders on the balcony directed the final, decisive aerial combat. On September 15, 1940, now celebrated as Battle of Britain Day, the Luftwaffe suffered catastrophic, unsustainable losses. The German invasion plan, Operation Sea Lion, was permanently postponed and later canceled entirely.